Okay, I wanted to bring you guys something a little bit different today. This is sort of in a way a response to, or it was triggered by some thoughts I had about a video that Rob posted recently, aka Bland Humanoid, talking about John Carpenter's The Thing and how that's one of his favorite movies of all time. And and I have to agree that I really enjoy that movie. And it got me thinking about, in general, not even necessarily related to gaming in any way, but just in general thinking about some of my favorite films. I'm a huge film fan. I have always loved movies, and in college I was even a radio, television, and film major for a long time. I eventually switched my major to English, but I continued to minor in radio, TV, and film. But it's one of my favorite hobbies. It's one of my favorite pastimes. And I like a huge scope of films covering all different genres from all different eras of filmmaking. And so it really got me thinking, and it normally, because I like films so much, because they're such a broad scope of films that I enjoy, it's hard for me to kind of just like make a top 10 list, coolest, most awesome movies of all time type of a thing. But, I said, you know what, it'd be a good challenge. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to force myself to kind of take what I have, to take inventory of the movies that are kind of rumbling through my mind right now, or that are kind of a constant influence on my life. And as a consequence, you get a picture of how I was shaped by films growing up, and so in a way it might influence a little bit of my approach to role playing, the kinds of role playing that interests me. So I thought it would be really interesting to talk about. So here you go. This is my top 10 favorite movies that I can think of right now. This list as always with anything with me, is subject to change. As I said, based on mood, based on, I'll probably halfway through talking about this list, I'll probably remember some other movie that is totally wicked awesome, and I'll try to cram that into my list at the last second. But I'm going to try and contain myself. So let's start with number 10. 28 Days Later. This film really revitalized the zombie film genre, in my particular opinion. A genre which had actually grown pretty stale, pretty uninteresting for a long time. Of course, I'm a big fan of the really old Romero stuff, Night of the Living Dead. The original Dawn of the Dead was a really good one, and there were a few of them kind of sprinkled here and there that made for good film going. But for the longest time, in the 70s and the 80s, and even into the 90s, there were so many just cookie-cutter zombie sequels that there was like no effort put into them almost whatsoever to make them fun and interesting and scary, and they just kind of got boring. And when 28 Days Later came out, I was entirely surprised. I don't even remember why I initially picked up this film, because I had pretty much had my fill of zombie cinema at the time. But I'm so glad that I did, because this movie made zombies interesting again. It made zombies scary again. It made zombie cinema worth experiencing, and it kind of ushered in a new era. In fact, I think a lot of the current, the current revitalization of zombie film, or of zombie culture, because it's getting everywhere now. It's getting into our video games, into television programs, and comic books, and all that kind of thing. A lot of that movement is owed to this film, because again, it kind of played with the some of the stereotypes. This introduced the concept of the fast zombie, the zombie that wasn't just a shambling mound crying brains. They could just pounce on you in an instant, and it just took one little scratch, and it was over for you, and it made zombies scary. It was a very good film, not only as a zombie film, but it's a very good horror film in general. And anybody who has any interest whatsoever in horror or zombie genres of film should check this out. Number 9 on my list. This is one of those rare movies that absolutely exceeded every already high expectation that I had for it. And it stands to me as the best superhero film that has ever been released so far. And that is The Incredibles. Sorry for the glare there. I'm going to try and control that. Pixar's The Incredibles. This movie, again, when I first heard about it, I was anticipating it. I was kind of following up on with the previews and watching the trailers and everything. And Pixar normally does really top-notch work, so I kind of had high expectations. I love superheroes. I love superhero films. And so I was like, this should be pretty cool. I'm hoping that they really do a good job with this. And when I sat down in the theater and when it came on screen, I was just blown away. And to this day, it still stands the test of time to me as the best superhero narrative in cinema, the best, deepest, most interesting, most relatable character development in a super's film, in cinema. And it just succeeds on every level, and it's almost and it almost rides the fence between kind of like the James Bond super spy and the superhero genres at the same time, and that makes it kind of interesting. It gives it a nice, interesting flavor. But it's kid-friendly, it's funny, and it's voiced exceptionally well. The characterizations are just excellent. The use of the powers and the action sequences in this film is better done than any other superhero film, in my particular opinion. And it's just absolutely fun. It is just a great movie to watch, and you can rewatch this movie over and over again, and it really stands up, and it's an excellent, excellent film. I highly recommend this one. And of course, being a general fan of comedy films and science fiction films, it as well as being a fan of most of the geeky stuff like Star Wars and Star Trek and Babylon 5 and all that kind of stuff, it makes sense that, of course, Galaxy Quest has to make my list. If you consider yourself even passing, having a passing interest in Star Trek, Star Wars, or anything science fiction, you should watch this film. This is the best Star Trek film. Even though it's not a Star Trek film, it's a Star Trek satire, and it's not only making fun of Star Trek as a show, but it's making fun of, it's laughing at itself, and laughing at the fact that what Star Trek fans will do, the lengths that they will go to, as well as the cast. Of course, it centers around a group of actors who are actors on a Star Trek-like television show. And their lives, like coping with being on the in the shadow of this show, and it has some of the wittiest, most memorable dialogue of any film, and it's one of those most often one of those films that's quoted more than just about any other around my game table. Just because it is so classic, it is so memorable, it is so hilarious, and even though I'm not such a big Tim Allen fan, he has a couple of good movies. This is his best role. For the geeks out there, he does exceptionally well. Everybody in this film does just an excellent job. Like I said, even though there's a couple of good Star Trek movies out there like Wrath of Khan or First Contact, which are passable. This is the best non-Star Trek Star Trek film. This is the best Star Trek film, even though it's not a Star Trek film. Watch it. Highly recommended. So I guess that was my number 8. So number 7, Ghostbusters. How can you talk about movies, especially if you're a child of the 80s, and not talk about Ghostbusters? This is really kind of a cornerstone film. I mean, it really almost legitimized, invented, established the genre of kind of the comedy sci-fi. And Bill Murray was always one of my favorite comedians from Saturday Night Live, and he does some of his best work in this movie. And Dan Aykroyd I always enjoyed as well, and Harold Ramis with some of his deadpan, uber nerd delivery is just great. And it's just a fun story. It's a fun movie that doesn't take itself too seriously, and it's filled again with just moments, lines of dialogue and imagery that you'll just remember for years and years and years. And I first watched this, I believe, when I first saw it. I couldn't have been more than maybe 5 or 6 years old when it had just come out, and ever since then, it's always stuck in my mind. I've always been a huge fan of this movie. So no movie collection is really complete, especially no kind of / geek movie collection is complete without Ghostbusters. If you have not seen this film, turn off this, seriously, turn off my video right now, go out, Netflix it, or go to Blockbuster or whatever, watch this movie, because I have no sympathy for you if you have not seen Ghostbusters. Number 6. This might be kind of a surprise because, with most of the films I've been showcasing here, a lot of them are science fiction-y, or fantasy superheroes or whatever. So a lot of people might be surprised by this film, but I think it's absolutely exceptional, and that's Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? This, again, even though it's kind of an unassuming film on my list, is one of the most quoted around my game table. Me and one of my other friends in particular absolutely love this movie. We've watched it a million times, and the dialogue is just so clever. And of course, for the nerds, the literature nerds out there, probably know that this is an adaptation of Homer's The Odyssey, and but told in kind of the American 1930s, kind of Depression era 1930s, and about a group of idiots who break out of prison and go hunting for a supposed treasure, and it's kind of just about their journeys along the way, about them kind of understanding each other, kind of just coping with all the problems that life throws their way, all the obstacles, as the old blind man on the rail cart would say, and so it's a very good film. I highly recommend anybody who hasn't seen it to check it out. And even though, like I said, you look at it and you might not think that it'd be something exceptional, but it truly is. And number 5 is the movie that Rob was talking about, John Carpenter's The Thing. I am a huge John Carpenter fan in general, and I also happen to be a huge fan of Kurt Russell. And so anytime John Carpenter and Kurt Russell work together on a project, it is pretty much destined to be gold in my particular opinion. And this, even being a John Carpenter fan, this is absolutely one of John Carpenter's finest films. A very surreal, very haunting, very deep and thought-provoking horror film about, an alien, basically a strange alien creature that crash lands in Antarctica, and it's discovered by a group of researchers out there and absolutely runs amok. And nobody knows who to trust, and because the alien could be anyone. So it's just a very, very good film. And it's one of the best examples of kind of cerebral horror out there, I think, and it's absolutely worth watching. Number 4, we're talking about kind of cerebral sci-fi. Blade Runner deserves a spot on the list. It is probably the most atmospheric, kind of the most effective use of atmosphere and just kind of like set design and lighting of any science fiction film that's been released in my memory. And it's just a very interesting film that has a lot of undertones about the human condition. What is it to be human? And the struggles of who are we, and is anything real? What is real? And what in this world is lasting? And I'm a big fan of a lot of Harrison Ford's earlier films, and this is a good example of one where he honestly doesn't have a whole lot of dialogue in this film, but he doesn't really need it. His character Rick Deckard just kind of exists to kind of puzzle out this mystery of humanity as he's kind of plodding along in this film. but it really kind of comes to, at the very end of it, it ends in a incredible kind of gripping climax. It's not really about the action, although there is some action in this film. The action is really just a way to kind of drive the characters to face each other and confront the issues of who they are. An absolutely superb film, one of my very favorites. Obviously, it's number 4 on my list of favorite films of all time. And I mentioned I was a child of the 80s, and talking about gripping, moving, powerful science fiction narratives of the 80s, you have to talk about The Terminator. Though Terminator 2 was a very, very good film, very fun, lots of action, exceptional quality special effects for its time, and is a film that is much loved even by me. I think the original movie, the very first Terminator, really kind of set the stage, and it makes me, when I think about it, everything that Terminator 2 is, every success that it was, really owes itself to the original film. Because if the original film was no good, there wouldn't have been a sequel to it. And this kind of in the maybe in a similar vein to the way Alien and subsequently its sequel Aliens, where Alien was a bit more of kind of like a lurking, dreadful, more kind of slow building terror to it, whereas Aliens was obviously focused a bit more on the action and the oppressive atmosphere. I relate the same thing to the Terminator films. I think the original Terminator film is much more about kind of the lurking dread, and I think Michael Biehn's character, Kyle Reese, sums it up very well when he's telling Sarah Connor that there is no what does he say? You can't bargain with this guy. There is no way around the Terminator. He is on a mission, and he will not stop that mission until it's done. And so it's that fear that he will never, he never gets tired, he never sleeps, he will never stop. And that is kind of the underpinning theme, the underpinning mood that carries this movie, that makes this movie successful, and it makes you empathize and feel for the characters of Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese as they're trying to escape this madness. And so this is number 3 in probably my favorite movies of all time. I can watch this a million times and never get tired of it. And of course I talked about John Carpenter and Kurt Russell, and so what better way to come together than Big Trouble in Little China, my second favorite film of all time. This is an absolutely fantastic film that, again, kind of like Ghostbusters, I don't even remember how old I was necessarily the first time I saw it. I must have probably been around the same age. And I instantly fell in love with it. And it's so memorable. Kurt Russell's character, what's so amusing about the narrative of this film is that Kurt Russell's character, Jack Burton, just gets swept up in this tornado of events that he really has no control over, and he's just kind of struggling to hang on to kind of keep up with everybody else. And but what's amusing about it is that he thinks himself the hero. He'd like to think that he's the hero of this movie, when really he's just kind of blundering through it, and he's just one step ahead of basically getting horribly killed by the forces that are going on around him that are quite honestly beyond his comprehension. So it's a very, very funny film, and again, some of the best dialogue, some of the most memorable dialogue and memorable scenes of cinema, in my opinion. And again, kind of like Ghostbusters, it's a film that the underlying story is a pretty serious matter, but the movie doesn't take itself too seriously. It takes a lot of opportunities to kind of poke jokes and make fun of itself, and kind of demonstrate that the characters really are kind of out of their element. They're out of their league. But yeah, so my second favorite film of all time, Big Trouble in Little China. Great film. Of course, so you're asking the eternal question, what is my number 1 favorite film of all time? And it has to be said, this is kind of a tricky one, and you'll see why I say that in a second. But when I really thought about it, when I really dug deep, what is one of the most defining films, single films of me as a person, my kind of mentality, the way I view films, the expectations that I hold for films, and the kind of storytelling that draws me into films, and that is The Empire Strikes Back. I'm a big Star Wars fan in general, and so you ask, why did I pick Empire Strikes Back? It's really hard for me because again, kind of how I said about the Terminator, really everything that Empire Strikes Back owes itself to the first Star Wars film, A New Hope, and it really wouldn't have even been there if A New Hope wasn't a good film, if there weren't redeeming characters and storylines going on in it. But really, the film trilogy comes to its most poignant, its most dramatic, its most tense in Empire Strikes Back. This is, kind of, as always, basically labeled as the second act of the three-act play of Star Wars. And, in the second act is where all the tension builds. The first act is introducing all the characters and getting us to empathize with them and understand their struggles. And then in the second act, you put them in danger. And then, of course, there's the classic moment, where it's revealed that Darth Vader is in fact Luke's father, and, which was something that Ben neglected to tell him. And then so there's this whole question about, okay, well, why did Ben keep this secret? And is Darth Vader, is he really his father? And what's going on? The very first time I experienced this film, it was totally mind-blowing. Because you didn't know. You didn't know if Darth Vader was telling the truth. You didn't know what was really going on. Was he just trying to manipulate Luke, or was it kind of being played from the other angle? Was it Obi-Wan who was protecting him from secrets too dark for him to comprehend? And so this film is just it's so perfect cinematically. Some people can snipe at it all day long. People can say that there's some hammy acting in it. People can say that, the special effects are dated, or they can say that, they can say whatever they want about this film. But to me, it really stands the test of time as kind of one of the most moving, one of the most emotionally gripping, one of the most consistently exciting films. Like almost the entire runtime of the film, you're always engaged. The movie grabs you and it never lets go, because you want to know what's going to happen next. You want to know how they're going to get out of these situations, and it's just kind of a snowballing effect where the movie starts off innocently enough, and it just gets worse and worse and worse as it goes along for all of the characters involved. And it ends in a spectacular finale, a cliffhanger finale, before, leading into Return of the Jedi, that just leaves you, awestruck. It just leaves you realizing that you've just experienced something special. And so for obvious reasons I've gone into, reasons I won't bore you with any longer, I love Star Wars, and I think Empire Strikes Back is the absolute pinnacle of the achievement of Star Wars as a movie franchise. And so it is absolutely my favorite movie of all time. There were a couple of others. Actually, there's so many others. I love so many different types of films that I could talk forever about them. But I just wanted to kind of talk about very, very briefly a couple of others that didn't quite make my list, and I was kind of struggling, but that are very memorable films that are worth watching. One of them is Mystery Men. I love superheroes, and I love superhero satire. And this is a very effective satire, in my opinion. Again, Ben Stiller is kind of a so-so actor for me. Most of his films I don't really care for, but I think this is the most enjoyable of his films. But there are a bunch of other actors in here that that are just top notch. I mean, it has a top notch cast, and it's a very funny film that owes itself a lot to, you know, kind of taking the superhero genre and turning it on its ear and saying, you know, okay, well, how ridiculous would it be, you know, if you kind of threw real people out into the street and told them to be superheroes and be the kind of gaudy, flashy, spandex-wearing superheroes, and what would happen, you know, if a bunch of these guys got together and tried to go out and fight crime. And the result is just hilarious. Great, great film. Of course, I'm sure there's probably not a person on the internet who has not seen The Matrix by now, but it deserves to be said that this is an absolutely excellent film. It was a mind-blowing film the first time I saw it. You know, that first kind of realization, you know, when they tell Neo that everything, you know, the world around him has been a lie, and everything is just you know, a computer program that was made for to contain his brain. And it's a very good film, it's a very effective action film, but it's also a very good kind of thriller, kind of suspense film. You know, for that slow realization that the world is not what it seems. The second and third movies are absolute garbage. I basically pretend that they don't exist. I don't even own copies of them. I don't think I ever will. But the very first Matrix film, if you treat it as a solo film, is absolutely cinematic gold. It's something that's definitely worth watching. You know, is it like the greatest film ever? Does it have the best dialogue? Does it have the best plot? Does it have the best acting? No, but it is an exceptional film as a whole, and it's absolutely worth experiencing. And say what you want to say about M. Night Shyamalan, and he pretty much deserves it by this point, because his career is almost unredeemable at this point. But Unbreakable stands as my favorite of his films, and actually probably one of my favorite superhero kind of suspense, you know, related films of all time. And a lot of people throw around the concept of, you know, it's getting kind of popular to talk about the realistic superheroes these days, and this is a better, you know, is the best, the most well told, the most suspenseful, the most interesting, and honestly, in my particular opinion, the most realistic real superhero film out there. This really explores what it would be like to discover, you know, if you had superpowers, and to discover them and to understand what that means and how that changes your life and who you would become at that point. You know, a lot of people complain that the movie is kind of slow. You know, it's really kind of methodically paced, but that's because it's not an action film. It's a thriller. It's a suspense. It's a drama film. It's about the psychology. It's about going through life, not knowing who you are, and then when you realize who you are, how that changes you. And very good acting in this film, very good, like I said, direction, atmosphere, mood, music is exceptional in this film. But it's just a very interesting story, and it is one that's I highly recommend watching. If you watch no other M. Night Shyamalan film, and you know, a couple of his films are okay. The Sixth Sense was pretty decent, but really this is kind of, I consider this the pinnacle of his achievement in storytelling, that this is the best, most cohesive, most interesting, and most impactful story that he's told in any of his films. So anyway, that's just kind of a quick, or maybe not so quick, look at some of my favorite movies, and feel free to fire any comments off at me. Let me know where you agree and where you disagree with my choice of films. I welcome it, and talk to you guys soon.